browser. And as I'm related to Arquillian project, I will obviously show how Arquillian fits in the picture. Anyone knows Arquillian? Anyone using it? Okay, then that's good, because I have also some introductory part. Before we dive into the geeky stuff, just a short introduction. These are my online coordinates, so if you like my talk or don't like it, then you can tell it over Twitter. If you want to know what I'm up to, then I'm on GitHub, and in Git commits you can obviously find my email, but just to repeat, what's my email account. So my name is Bartosz Majsak. I'm not really Swiss guy, as you might assume from the agenda. I'm actually Polish, but I moved to Switzerland a while ago. I work for Cambridge Technology Partners, which is a consulting company, but what it means is that I'm doing Java development on my daily shifts. On the night shifts, I'm involved in our Arquillian project, and I'm a core team member, and I'm leading a bunch of extensions, which I hopefully will demonstrate successfully today. Other than that, I'm quite addicted to skiing. That's why I moved to Switzerland. Actually, that's the only reason. All right, so before we dive to the code, let's step back for a moment and talk about software development and testing in general. And I promise this is actually the very last time I use Lego on my slides, because I've noticed it's overused. I mean, every conference that there's at least 2 people using Lego as a metaphor. But let's use it for the very last time. So I mean, for me, building software is actually like building Lego. So we combine bits and pieces together, and then we have some nice building or a nice structure. So when I'm developing software, what I have in mind is this kind of Lego stuff. I mean, the purpose of it is quite easy to figure out. I guess it should be reasonably fast and probably not so hard to fix. But then I look at my code after 2 years, or I go to some project and I see this. Because we Java developers normally love layers of indirection, so we put a lot of layers because it costs nothing. And then we need to face with such a beast. I mean, obviously reasons are different. I mean, one is that we didn't really have skilled people in the project, or we have a lot of different people with great ideas. So this green guy comes from one person, this black one is from another architect. But we need to face legacy stuff quite often, especially if you are in the consulting business. Then you are most of the time dealing with some legacy stuff. And another reason why we have it is that we don't write tests first. But if we are lucky, we have tests. So at least if we change something, then we will probably know that we won't break a lot. So we have tests, right? We have probably a lot of unit tests. So by definition, we test in isolation. And I'm a huge fan of unit testing, the fastest feedback possible. They give you this safety net. But there are a bunch of problems with that as well. One is that obviously you just see a very small fragment of this picture. So you are not really sure if this green guy, which I often see people with scary faces like, geez, it's so slow and it takes ages to set up, it's impossible to do it properly. And actually it was. It was damn hard, but it's getting easier. But there are still at least 2 concerns we need to address up front. So the first one is the containers. Where should we actually run our tests? Should we run it in the production-like environment? And if you are dealing with big guys like WebSphere or WebLogic, you should really run your tests in the production-like environment. So that's the first concern. If you would ask me, I would say, why should I care? I would love to have tests which are portable, so I can run them in embedded Glassfish, I can run them in Spring test context, and I can run them in WebSphere, because you never know what happens in WebSphere under the hood. So that's the first thing which we need to address. And another thing is deployment. How we should deal with deployment. Should it be like in good old times with Cactus, where we build everything from scratch and then we deploy the full-blown WAR file and run the tests? I mean, if we are dealing with a not so pet storage project, then it might take a lot of time. And as I'm a lazy guy, I would also love to run my test like this. Anyone using Eclipse here? Still, it's like me. I can't switch to IDEA. I tried 3 times already, but I failed. Anyways, anyone knows what those shortcuts are doing? Both? If you know what both are doing, then you have a beer from me. Yes. Alright, so the first one around JUnit and the second one around testng. So beers on me. Alright, so here's where Arquillian comes to play. And actually it addresses all the concerns I mentioned. So it handles a variety of containers, as you will see, and takes care of the deployment process. And I can run it from my IDE. And you don't need to know the shortcuts. If you are using IDE, you have the different ones, I guess. Okay, so let's have a look how Arquillian tests look like. This is the typical JUnit test, let's say. Keep in mind this template. I highly recommend to follow it because it gives you a nice focus on what you want to test. I will elaborate what it means later on when we dive to some other testing aspect. But this is the normal JUnit test, right? And it will fail. Anyone knows why? What's wrong with converter? Exactly. That's true. Easy, huh? Alright, so Arquillian test will look like this. There are only 3 things which are different. First of all, there's at inject, so we assume that our component, let it be EGB, because we all need to develop EGBs, or Spring, or CDI, whatever, is injected to our tests. Then, obviously, in case of JUnit, not obviously, but in case of JUnit, we use custom runner. In case of testng, you extend another class. And then we prepare the deployment method. When I first saw it, I thought, geez, it's quite tedious and a lot of stuff you need to write by hand to create your deployment package. But that's actually getting easier. I mean, you still can follow this idea of micro deployments, so you basically control everything you deploy, which gives you quite a nice opportunity to rethink your modularity at some point. But you can also use full-blown artifact like war created by your Maven build. That's not a problem. You can also import it and use it as your test deployment. And there is also support for Eclipse, which will scan your test class and automatically infer what kind of classes are needed and generate the method for you. It will be included in the newest JPOS tools. It's currently in the beta build, so you can give it a spin already. Yeah, but the cool thing about this test is that there is no notion about the container. So if my container supports dependency injection, so let it be CDI, I can run it just by switching the profile. That's pretty portable, isn't it? So let's have a look how it works under the hood. So first we select the containers, and we support quite a lot of them. So we have 3 different types. The first one is embedded, so it's running within the same JVM. It can be Glassfish embedded, Tomcat embedded, Wealth embedded, which is kind of mocked environment. Then there is another type called managed. And managed container runs in the separated JVM process and is entirely controlled by Arquillian. And there is a remote, which means that the server or the container we are connecting to and deploying our test needs to be already up and running, which makes it a bit faster because we don't need to start and stop the container on our own. So first thing what happens is that we select the container. The rule here is that there need to be only one on the class path. So if you want to have different profiles, then with Maven if you want to have different containers, you use Maven profiles, so you change the dependencies. It's done through the SPI. So we select the container and then we start it or connect to it. Start meaning if it's embedded or managed, and connect if it's remote. And the next step is that we deploy our test package. Then we obviously run it in container, we collect the results, and we clean afterwards. I heard from a lot of people complaining about the sort of limitation that if you have a managed container, the deployment and the whole container lifecycle is per each test class. And that was true, but there is an extension currently which can allow you to run the whole test suite. So you start your container once, and then you do subsequent deployments, and then you clean up afterwards. So it's a bit faster. Okay, so that's actually all what I wanted to talk about Arquillian. Let's see it in action now. So I have my nice application called Beer Advisor, which is very smart because I can say I'm interested in beers from Belgium. So I have my two favorite ones. I don't have Ukrainian beers yet, but I think I can get it inspired in the, or we change it to Poland version. So I'm from Poland anyway, so I should change it. Or I can say, let's say, what is the strongest beer? And the strongest beer is End of History. And this is the actual bottle. And this is the actual price and actual amount of alcohol. And it's sold out, you can't buy it anymore. It's by a Brewdog brewery. This is two Scottish guys, quite crazy. They sell also another one which is called Sing the Bismarck, because they compete with Germans with the stronger beer. And it's 42%. And it's way cheaper and tastes awful. And that's my taste. Okay, so the application itself is based on JPA. I have a REST endpoint which I want to show you, and then we dive into the web UI testing. So when I was writing this application, I was struggling a bit with the new API from JPA2, how it's called? Fluent API for building your queries, criteria API, which is not really the most pleasant API to work with. I hope it will get better. Currently I switched to Query DSL, which is way nicer. Anyway, so that's another benefit from Arquillian, that it's also a kind of a learning platform. So I was not really sure if my queries are right, and they were at the beginning. So I had my test cases running against some in-memory database, and I was verifying if the query constructed to criteria API is really doing what it should. And for the strongest beer, it was actually quite tricky, or maybe I wasn't really aware of what should I do. Okay, so the domain model is very simple. We have obviously a beer, and we have brewery. There is many-to-one, or one-to-many, depends on which site you look at. And we have a repository for beers. So let's have a look at the test. So the most pragmatic approach, let's say, is to do it by hand. So we obviously inject our implementation of beer repository. We do the test deployment. We create the test deployment package. Then we inject entity manager, as you want to clean some and insert some data, and the transaction, because we want to run it in the transaction. Then before the test, we clear, we insert, and we start the transaction. Right? And on line 142, there is a test. Pretty cool, huh? Very nice, and it's quite limited. And you shouldn't do it like this. There is a better way. So there is an extension to Arquillian called persistent extension, surprise, which hides all the boilerplate. So it's under the hood currently. It's using dbunit. Anyone heard of dbunit? So, but it's a bit extended. So it's based on dbunit concept of data sets, which is very much database schema related. So you can use Excel, XML, CSV to define your data sets, which are going to be inserted to your DB. On top of that, we provide the YAML and JSON, which is a bit more pleasant. And what this test does is that it takes this file, seed it to your DB, wrap the whole test execution in transaction, and then, depends how you set up, either it will clean the DB at the beginning of the test, which is the better way, or at the end. Let's have a look at the file, how it looks like, just to give you a glimpse. So yeah, we have a data set which is reflecting our DB columns. So we have breweries and we have beers. Obviously, we can combine more of them. We can combine formats. The extension itself is inspired by how is it called, Unitils. There is another testing framework which is not really evolving that much nowadays, but they have very similar concept of annotation-driven data seeding. Another one which you can do is matching the DB. So you exercise your business logic, and then you have the data set, and you can compare directly on the DB level. You don't need to do any assertions from the test itself. It's pretty handy when you need to reproduce some bug from production and you have some big data. Then there is a tool called Jailer which can import to DB unit datasets, and you basically can. I would like to promote a bit the assertions. Fluent assertions is fast assert, or the fork of it, JAssert. It's a nice Fluent interface which is giving you some sort of DSL for verifying state of your objects. So highly recommended. For me, it's a bit nicer than Handrest because it gives you a bit better IDE support, but it's a matter of taste. Anyway, I highly recommend to form your assertions in some sort of DSL-ish way, as we will see also later in the tests. If you have any questions, just raise your hands, because I'm here for you, so you can use the time as well. I can try to run it. Hopefully demo gods are not against me. What happens under the hood is JBoss AS7 managed, it's started, and now we deploy our application and we will run the tests. So voila, it works. And at the end we clean up, undeploy, and stop the container. Okay. Now Eclipse tell me how should I go back to the. Okay. All right. So that's about the JPE testing. We have also I have developed also another part which is REST. So we can get some info about the beers and we can delete them, etc., etc. So let's have a look how we can test it. And this will demonstrate pretty cool stuff from Arquillian. One thing to mention is that this runs in container, but Arquillian also provides client mode, meaning that this will be only used as the deployment engine and all the tests are executed from outside. So in terms of UI testing, pretty much makes sense because we don't want to deploy WebDriver stuff within the container, right? We only want to create the deployment package, deploy it on the server, so have it under control, and then run our tests. Let's have a look at the tests of REST endpoint. Okay, so here's exactly what I said. We have annotation run as client. We deploy our application. Here's I made it a bit hidden. The deployments basically takes all what I need, plus it will scan the web folder to add all the web-related parts. But as I said, you can use Maven Resolver to resolve your war, or you can take arbitrary file from anywhere on the file system. Then we deploy the application. Arquillian will give us back the URL, so it's quite flexible. And then I test my REST endpoint. So here I'm using REST Assured. This is another interesting library. It's called REST Assured, like this. These all examples are on GitHub, so you can just have a look at it. You will see all the tools I mentioned. So it's a quite slick DSL for playing with your REST endpoints. So as you can see here, I am expecting success and the content with this guy. when I send the request with ID 1, right? And then I have this other test which tests if I can delete. So delete basically removes it from the DB, and then we accept the empty content. So this kind of HTTP status. Let's run it to prove if I'm not wrong. So again, now what's happening is that we deployed only the deployment package without any Arquillian additions to the container. Because normally, if we test in container, there obviously needs to be some additional jars from Arquillian to make all this stuff play nicely together. But here it's only deployment engine. So pretty slick, huh? The only thing which I don't like about this test is that this delete stuff is very optimistic, because we return empty response and we assume that it's gone from the DB. So the JPA tests were, how is it called? Black box testing or white box testing? Which one is with the knowledge of the inside? Black box or white box?
White box.
Then this is the black box, right? Because we have no knowledge whatsoever about the internal stuff. But there is also something which is in between, and it's called gray box. So wouldn't it be cool to talk with our REST as we have it here, but then at the end, for instance, get an insight to the container lifecycle and see if this stuff was really deleted. And this is where one of the newest extensions from Arquillian comes to play. It's called warp. So we have warp test. Pretty much the same, except one annotation here which is saying that it's a warp test. So we are in the gray box mode, and then the activity is exactly what we had in our previous test, so this one. And this happens on the client side. And then there is another part which is called inspect, and this inspect is running inside the server. And here we can hook into servlet lifecycle, we can hook into JSF lifecycle if you still like JSF, and we can inject all our components which we have bundled with our application. So in this case, I'm injecting CDI repository, and I'm verifying after the test execution, after the servlet, then if I get my beer by ID, then the response is null. So there is no beer with ID 1 in the DB anymore. Obviously there are other ways, but for the sake of the demo, I guess it's quite clear what's going on. Any questions so far?
Yes, it's not very expensive to want a container every time.
Yeah, it is. That's why you have also the remote one. So you can start your container of choice, let it be Glassfish, WebLogic, whatever. It will be up and running, and then Arquillian will be only deploying stuff to your tests, to your container. And as I said, the drawback was that the deployment happened per test class. But since few months, we have also the possibility to deploy one package, and then you run the test suite. I mean, one can question that, because then you assume that you have very strict control over what's going on inside, and you know exactly what kind of leftovers are there. But if you have your test structured in this way and you really want to do it like this, then there is a possibility. So then it obviously cuts a lot of time. Because in terms of JBoss AS7 here, it starts in 2 seconds. But if I have a remote, then the test execution is only like 10 seconds or something like that. So in total here, yeah, in the persistent extension, I have like 80 Arquillian tests, which deploys against the container. So for Glassfish embedded, it's like 2.5 minutes on this machine. On JBoss is pretty similar. But then if I run it against remote, then it's like 1 minute something. So there is a huge benefit, that's for sure. But obviously, it requires from you a bit more of setup in terms of CI and things like that, because this build is self-contained. You can download this thing, then from GitHub, for instance, from my repository, and you run it locally. Obviously, Maven will download everything from the internet, but it's self-contained. So you don't need to worry about all the setup, because it's done already for you. So there are pros and cons, and obviously the time aspect is one of the most crucial. So therefore, you can also use remote container. There was another question.
Yes, why did you break out of
black box, why don't you use another REST request to check for did you delete or not?
Yes, that's a good point, but as I said, for sake of the demo, maybe this is an unfortunate example, but let's say if you do something within the REST request, and then there is some additional stuff like, I don't know, you emit some event or something like that, then maybe hooking into the container and observing if everything went right might be beneficial. But obviously you can do it differently, that's for sure. I'm not saying that's the way you should do it. I just wanted to demonstrate this gray box mode that you can actually talk from the outside but still have a knowledge of what's going on under the hood. Okay, so that's the first part of the demo. So we are all happy, our application is bulletproof, everything works, and then we have this. So angry customers or angry business users because the application doesn't look good in IE. So we need to also verify if the features we implemented and tested through the integration tests, these are also working as the user is expecting, so from his point of view, from his user story or whatever. And since the application here is a web application, there is one very well-known open source tool, which is exactly. And anybody knows the history about the origins of the name? Anyone here using Quality Center?
Yeah.
So before HP acquired them, the company was called, yes, it was called Mercury. And if you get poisoned by mercury, then you take selenium with vitamin C, and you should be all good. That's why it's called selenium. I don't know what these guys were taking while developing this stuff, but anyways. Okay, so we have Selenium. It's very good. It provides you the Selenium IDE for Firefox, so you can record, which is pretty good also for support guys. So they have the angry customers, they can try to recreate, and then you have your tests, right? So you have like 100 of these kind of tests from Selenium IDE, and you need to maintain them, and after a while you look like this. And let me show you why. Because Selenium IDE or Selenium itself is very low-level stuff. I'm not sure about the current Selenium IDE, but when I exported it, when I was developing those tests, will be back to such a code base after a while, you will be lost, and this is maintenance code. And yeah, I mean, I did this presentation a few times and I know that this is enter, but before it I wasn't aware. And other than that, you don't really know what's going on here. I mean, you have some thread slab, then before you check if element is present in the loop. It's very weird, we can do better. Anyone heard about WebDriver?
Yeah.
Okay. And the page objects which they are promoting as well. No. So we do a quick intro to the page objects. But first let's have a look at the better way of writing those tests. So here we have a given block which is the initial context. So I'm on the beer advisor page. And then in the when block I'm exercising my application. So I provided some sort of a fluent API or DSL-ish API which mimics what user is doing. So I search for the strongest. And then in the then block I verify that I have only one strongest, and the strongest one should be named end of the history. I mean, this beer is not the JPA beer, it's a test object which I implemented and provided some assertion methods, but you can do it differently as well. And this looks a bit easier comparing to our first version. Huh? It's very easy to understand what the hell is going on here. So let's try to run it. Works, really works. It still has some disadvantages, like this one, hard-coded Firefox driver. We can do it dynamically through some properties. And the base URL, which we should know up front, which might be tricky when we deploy on cloud sometimes. But speaking about page objects, so the idea of page objects is to encapsulate fragments of your website and expose the interaction in the way how the user is using it. So this is how it looks. I mean, this is a bit of more stuff than I used for the demo, but you can have a look on GitHub because there are more tests which are using additional things from WebDriver. So we encapsulate our search box. So this guy. And this is now a private web element of our object, of our class. And we say we find it by ID. So this reference will be injected using this page factory, but these are the internal details, so it's not really that relevant for the sake of the demo. The takeout for you is that this way you have very clean and maintainable tests. And it provides you quite a bit of interesting features to compose those page objects. But we still, as I mentioned here, we have a few problems. One is the unknown URL and the driver. So here's where Arquillian can help you, obviously. There is a drone part, which is basically small addition to WebDriver. You still are using WebDriver under the hood, but drone will take care of the whole life cycle. So it will open the browser, it will then close it. It actually will inject the browser to your tests, so you can make it configurable in quite easy way. In this case, it will still be Firefox because Chrome is giving me headache with the binary driver I downloaded yesterday. Thanks for the updates, Google. But anyways, you can do it in one place and then the test is portable. Another thing which is pretty handy is that you can limit the drone usage per test, so you can actually inject it here. So when you have tests for IE, then you can do it like this as well. And obviously Arquillian will give you back the resource of the deployed or URL of the deployed application. And let's see if it works. So before the port was 8080, and now it will be 288, I guess. Because the normal tests were running against the AS7, which is running under the hood, using which I show you the application. So now it takes a bit longer because we deployed the application and then we run all the tests. Again, it's AS7 managed. So from drone, two main things are that it's easier to configure and you have portable tests. And then you can use Arquillian as a testing, as a deployment engine, because those tests are run from the client side. Defined a bit differently, but that's not important. You can also, instead of run as client, you can do it like this. So then it will just deploy the package which you defined without all the Arquillian additions. Okay, so we are pretty much happy with the shape of our tests, but if you read the abstract, I said something about acceptance tests and things like that. And this nice JUnit template with given when then part, which is BDD kind of thinking of the tests, is pretty handy, but it does not give you that much of a benefit. I mean, it would be cool to have a tool where you can write tests like this. So we have a scenario fighting all Ukrainian peers. I hope you guys will help me tonight with this, into passing the test. And then we have this given when then. I think in the .NET world, the more popular role is arrange, act, assert. But it's basically the same thing. The main, and for me, there is no difference between TDD, BDD, whatever. It's still writing good tests. The idea behind BDD is that you are more focused about the features you're going to deliver. And this is the most important part. So we can use a very nice tool for writing this kind of tests, which is called Spock. Spock is Groovy testing framework and can be used for unit testing. It has very cool asserting mechanism with reporting what was wrong, and with a very detailed reports. But that's not the killer feature. The killer feature is how you can do mocks, and you definitely should have a look at Spock because it's groovy, so it's like, almost like Java. Except you don't need to write the semicolons. Okay, so the Spock test is called specification. That's how they call them, and hopefully I'll be able to find quickly this. Maybe here. Should be in the Groovy project somewhere. I'm still wondering why it's still so. Anyways, so as you can see, Groovy, no semicolons, but I mean still the same Arquillian stuff which you can use if you like. And then you have these nice blocks which structure your test a bit nicer. I mean, for the JUnit template, it's just a comment, and here it gives you a bit more meaningful structure for my taste. Obviously, if you want, Arquillian supports also JBehave, it supports Cucumber, so if you are into this kind of testing frameworks, you have support currently out of the box. So yeah, these are the same tests, but structured using Groovy. I can run it if you want, but it will give you the same results. I think we can skip it. Okay, so that's the acceptance part, right? But there is also this driven part. So I guess you all know this TDD cycle, right? So you write the failing test, then you make it running, and then if there is something still left for refactoring, you refactor. For the acceptance test-driven development, it looks a bit differently. Because we start from the failing end-to-end test, so in our case, this would be searching through the web application. And then within internal TDD cycles, we make it better. It's a bit more challenging and requires quite a bit of discipline, but there is one pretty sweet concept which can help you achieving this approach, and it's called walking skeleton. The idea is that you deploy the very pragmatic or minimalistic part of your application, let it be like static website, but you do it already automatically for your acceptance test, and then internally you start providing the implementation. So even though the acceptance test will be still failing, you already have the full mechanism for testing your application from the end user perspective. And here's where Arquillian can really help you, because with this deployment approach and the smaller bits and pieces which you can deploy separately, you have it out of the box. I mean, you have automation for your container, you have automation for building your deployment package. You don't even need to run Maven or something like that to make it running. And this is the concept which I borrowed from these two guys. Very good book, highly recommended, even though it's all about mocking. So they show you how to effectively use mocks for growing your code base. And for me, it's a must read. I think even more important than any other testing book which I know. So if you haven't heard about it, just grab it and read it, because it's just eye-opener. Okay, so a short recap what we hopefully learned today. So first we looked at Arquillian itself. So again, supports a lot of containers, embedded, managed, remote. Glassfish, WebLogic, WebSphere, even works on WebSphere 8.5 Liberty profile, and 8.5 as well. JBoss obviously, Tommy, lots of. I even wrote a Robocode container recently. If you heard about Core Wars, this is the game where you develop robots and they are fighting against each other. So there is a newer version which is called Robocode. So I thought it might be cool to test my robot against another robot, and so I treat the Robocode agent as the container, and I deployed both robots and collect the results. I mean, maybe I'm a bit too geeky about Arquillian, but at least I got the automation for free. It took me like 5 classes to write this stuff. Okay, persistent, so kind of DP unit way of testing your persistent layer. We are working on supporting another tools. The next one on the list is Liquibase, but also getting rid of the very low level data definition, so we will have more like entity way of describing your test data. Warp, which gives you this gray box way of testing. Drone, which provides you a bit of automation for WebDriver. Spock, which makes your test groovy sexy. And then the unknown part, only the part I took, which for me is quite interesting, but there are more extensions. So JBehave, Cucumber, these are another BDD frameworks. One is for Java, another one is comes from Ruby. Graphene, this is like Drone, but it's more like a wrapper or adapter or facade on top of WebDriver, so a bit nicer API. It's a bit easier to deal with Ajax stuff. And there are some JSF additions. Then there is Android testing. So the initial version was for testing web applications through Android, so Android WebDriver. But currently there is also a way to deploy your APK and run the tests natively. Based on what I know, it's using Selenium Droid, so I don't think it's really like 100% native, but at least you can test your PhoneGap application. Transaction, which is part of persistent, so you wrap your test into transaction. Jacoco for test coverage, very nice tool. Performance, which is like JUnit perf, so you can define some thresholds and stuff. Recording, pretty sweet new stuff where you can record your tests, record meaning a video. Forge plugins, and the last one, which is the craziest one for me, is the Byteman. So anyone heard about mutation testing? No. So Byteman is a way to test your tests. So you know if they are any good. So what you do, you manipulate the bytecode and you see if your tests are still capturing the errors. So let's say we change if opposite, or we do some injection failure. So we check in some end-to-end test if we are properly dealing with some unexpected behaviors. Stuff like that. Pretty crazy. Funny enough, it's very old concept, like from 80s, but currently it's gaining momentum. There is one tool for working with JUnit, which the name I don't remember, but I can put it somewhere on Twitter afterwards. And this is for mutation testing as well. Okay, and the last message to the community. Whatever you like to do, if you like to translate guides to your language, we are more than happy. We have 10 languages currently. Don't have Ukrainian and Russian yet, so easy to do. Then if you have feedback, so you use the tool, you think it sucks, just let us know. If you think it's great, maybe not even better, but good. If you have some ideas as well, if you want to code, we have some starters for different extensions. And yeah, I mean, we will be happy to have you on board. And this is where you can find us. Arquillian.org is the main entry point where you find basically everything you need, including guides. So if you don't really understood what I poorly was trying to explain during these 50 minutes, then you go there are guides. So you start from scratch and there's a step-by-step description what's going on and you can follow it writing your own code. Then the GitHub organization where you find all the extensions and the core module. Then Google+, we dumped Facebook in favor of Google+ somehow. And if you need some urgent help, then on JBoss testing there is always someone. Doesn't matter if it's 5 AM or now or whatever. Okay, that I guess concludes my talk. So thank you very much for staying with me. You can find this thing on GitHub. My first name, my last name, that's where it sits. The application is called Beer Advisor. And all the things are there with some comments. If you will need some explanation, don't hesitate, just drop me an email or tweet me. Any questions? So either it was very easy or I was talking totally unclear. Anyways, thank you for your time, enjoy your lunch and the rest of the conference. I should be hanging out for the next day and today as well.